Hello and welcome to another episode of God-Sized Stories. I've been doing this podcast for years now, and going back and looking at the archives, I was re-listening to some early episodes and decided maybe some of them could use some refreshing. I've been doing this for years, and obviously as time goes, my skills get better, the needs of the podcast get better, the technology I'm using is much better, but even me as a believer have come to know so much more about myself and so much about all of this that we're doing here. So I decided I would share my testimony again because where on one hand I love the first episode of the podcast where I share my story, and it's such a beautiful way to go back and watch my growth in so many ways. I figured it would be better to use again, or if I want to share it with other people, this would be a great place for people to start. I've been saying for a while now, both on the podcast and in person, that everyone has a testimony that is a believer. Everyone can share it. And I want this to be a testimony to that no matter how strong you think you are at sharing your story, you can always get better. You can always refine the way you share things. And we have such a powerful tool to show God's love to other people by sharing how He's shared it with us. So we're going to go through that today. And I'm going to start back at the beginning of my story. Even as such a young kid growing up in the middle of nowhere, Sherland, and how a little bit towards of how I got here today. Now, those of you that know me know how important my family is to me and how awesome I think my childhood was growing up out in the sticks, out in the country. It makes living in the suburbs hard sometimes and in the city impossible for me to do. And I grew up what many people would call an American dream type childhood. I didn't have any major, negative things going on. I had a loving mom and dad that cared for me. I had sisters, I had cousins I would see occasionally, aunts and uncles, and that life was great. It was built up by parents that taught me so much. They taught me so much about how to work jobs, be diligent, pay your bills, be a good American, just to do everything the right way. But everything in life that I learned was about doing it for yourself. That kind of person that just works really hard every day, refuses help even when help is needed. No, I'm good. We're okay. And that was good on one hand because it taught me great work ethic. But for other areas of my life and for later on in life when dealing with faith, it put a deep thing down inside of me that says, I don't need anyone else's help. And that was a huge stumbling block for me for many, many years. So I grew up within that family. And also at the same time, I grew up a very, very selfish child. I was what many people would refer to as the golden child. I got everything I want. And as a kid, I thought, and I would have argued as a kid, that I got it because I was a good kid. I did everything right. And I worked hard in school and blah, 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 all that stuff that now as an adult, I can look back and say, that was baloney. That was me being a selfish child. And so that's how I grew up. And I lived that way for years. And I carried that. My teen years were not hard, but while I was in it, I would have said they were very difficult. I struggled with a lot of things, but the real thing I struggled with was selfishness because I was making even my high school age all about me. All the money I had went into selfish desires that would only bring short, fleeting happiness. And I found myself investing all my time, effort, and energy into something that would never last. And I really hit a real deep, dark place in my life where I couldn't find happiness. I couldn't find joy. I was a jerk to people, especially my sisters. I took advantage of them when I could, and I was just mean. I was terrible. And I did it all under the guise of I'm a good person. So I work hard. I do all these things. No, I was being a jerk. Uh, and because of all those things, I was getting more and more upset, more and more sad, more and more depressed. and nothing was making me happy anymore. Until then, one day, a very dear, great friend of mine, Evan, invited me to go with him to a youth group lock in and stay up all night, have a good time. And I'm sitting there thinking, yeah, it sounds like a good time. I know a lot of these other teens, and what do I have to lose? Got nothing to lose here. If they're weird, I'll just leave. I've been very blessed recently as well. I've found a treasure trove of old SD cards, some over here, and found some really fun, happy old memories on some of those. And to my even more joy and surprise, there were video clips from that night on there, including some fun games we're playing. And then even our youth leader at the time tried his best. His name was Dan. Love that man. He tried very hard to stay up with us, but he couldn't make it. But that night was huge. It was really important for me for many reasons. For one, it taught me, without knowing then what the term was, but it taught me fellowship. It taught me having fun with people that can be building something that's more than just today and now. But the real gem of the weekend for that was it was a Saturday night and we stayed up all night. I was super tired. But they all said, "Hey, it's Sunday morning, church, we're all going. You should come with us too." And once again, I said the same phrase of, "What do I have to lose? Why not? Let's go." So we went, and I still remember the message that Pastor Doug gave better today than almost any message I've heard. It's been 20 years almost, and this one stands out just vividly to me in that moment, where he just talked about you can't find true happiness outside of God. And it was just like, whoa. It was like one of those moments in life too that I was so tired, but I went from being so tired to completely awake, 100% paying attention. Is the kind of thing I wish I could have at a flip of a switch, that we all desire to have. That if I could bottle it, I'd be the richest person in the world, kind of thing. But it was the Holy Spirit grabbing me, telling me, "Hey, wake up, listen to this." And that morning just stuck with me. And so then I started coming back every Sunday morning. But I wouldn't come to the later services that my friends were at. I'd go to the very early first service, and we'd sing the hymns, and we'd read more just straight from the Bible. And it was more because I knew my friends would be at the other ones and they'd distract me. And I knew this dude's telling me something important that I need to hear. So I'm going to come every week. I'm going to listen. I'm going to digest all of it in. But if I'm being honest, even then, what I was doing wasn't for God. It was me being still selfish. It was me wanting to do everything myself. It was me trying to build this thing to find this happiness. It wasn't really anything about God Himself. And that pattern continued. And I kept making marginal changes to my life to make myself better. It was still that same idea of being a good person, because that's what I grew up learning, was being a good person is what's important. And so that kept building in my life, and that kept getting more in my life. And I started cutting some habits that were bad, especially bad language was an important thing I was trying to cut out at the time, but it was more under the guise of being a good person. And the pattern continued and continued. And then summer came, and we went on this student youth mission trip. And I look back with such great memories. And we traveled really far to Reading, Pennsylvania. And we spent a week staying in a school, doing work around town, staying there with other teens from other churches. So during the day, we're out doing work projects, fun stuff like that. But then at night, we come back and we all meet together in the gym. And there's a guy there that's giving a sermon, and there's a band that's playing music, and people sharing testimonies. And it's a really beautiful night. But everybody kept warning me, wait till Thursday. Just wait till Thursday. I'm like, what's Thursday? What's happening Thursday? Everyone's like, oh, they try real hard to make you cry. It's real. They get you real good. And I'm like, I'm a man. I'm a tough guy. I'm not going to cry. But deep down, I'm worried. I'm like, what's going to happen Thursday? I don't know what's going to happen Thursday. So Thursday night finally comes. It's been an awesome week. We're making great friends from all over the country. We're doing great work at all these people's houses that need so much help. But once again, very selfish. Me. I'm doing this. Hey, it's me. Hey. And then finally, though, Thursday night comes. And we walk into the gym, and there's this massive, it's probably 10, 15-foot tall just cross right in the middle of the gym. And we sit around it, and the guy's talking, and he's like, hey, tonight's going to look a little bit different. We're going to do this whole thing and really learn about what Jesus Christ did for us. And he's like, we're gonna go through these stations. You're gonna learn a little bit at each station about Jesus and his life, and then we're all gonna come back and we're gonna have one last discussion. So we did that, and we went around the room and we collected all these little trinkets and all these little things and this really cool old nail. And we're going around, we're hearing all these things, and we come back down and we sit around the cross again. And this dude gave, still to this day, the best gospel presentation I've ever heard. It was beautiful, it was profound, and it was probably, because God knew I needed it. It was hitting me right in the heart. Uh, and then he ends this gospel presentation by pointing to this massive cross into the room, and he then talks about the stuff in our hand that's on this little nail, that talked about all the stuff that talked about Jesus all night. And he's like, hey, if you're ready to give all that to Christ and let him do all the work and do all the stuff we discussed tonight, stick that nail into the cross and go off and have a great night. And then afterwards, like that Thursday night is like the fun night. There's so much stuff, cool stuff to do, good food to eat. It's just a big celebration. And so one by one, everybody around me is getting up. There's probably a couple hundred kids in this room. They're putting their nail in and off they go, having a good time. But I couldn't do it. I'm stuck sitting on this hardwood gym floor, just distraught, fighting with myself, fighting with the idea of being a good person, fighting with the idea of doing everything myself, and just not ready to let God, to let Christ forgive me. Struggling with the idea that this was not something I could do myself. This was finally something that someone had to do for me. And I sat there and I was crying. I was like, I had tears running down my face, just crying that, like, God, there has to be another way. There has to be a way that you let me do this. I can't let you do this for me. I've done so many wrong things. I've been such a terrible person. I can't let you do this for me. And then it was a moment of just pure clarity that I finally realized how selfish I was. I never saw the selfishness. I always thought it was the guise of working hard and being a good person. And then it hit me. I'm selfish. I'm doing these things myself out of a selfish heart, not out of some, powerful thing. No, I was just being a turd. I just I have a perfect, wonderful God. I have a Christ that lived and died for me, and I won't listen to that out of some selfish reason. It clicked, and it all made sense. Everything that I'd been hearing for the year leading up to that had made perfect sense to me. And so I got up, I walked to the cross, and I pushed my nail into the cross. And at this point, I'd probably been sitting on that floor for over an hour. And I don't mean the whole night leading up to that point. I mean, he said the statement, "Hey, everybody, do this thing and then go have fun." After that point, I'd been sitting there for an hour, fighting, crying, upset, and now so filled with a joy that was completely unmatched to anything else I've ever experienced in this life, that finally understanding that message that Pastor Doug shared about what true happiness was, what joy really is. I had it in that moment, and I was just praising God in that moment, to then be the most humbled I've ever been, to turn around. Everyone else was gone except for in the bleachers was my youth leader and a handful of my almost the whole youth group sitting with them on the bleachers waiting for me. The power that they had just waiting for me, sitting there praying, hoping for me to come with them. it still humbles me to this day. And that brings me almost equal level of joy. And that was the big turning point in my life. Obviously, yeah, I still struggled with so many things. Still to this day, I'm a selfish person. That is the number one sin I fight to this day, is being a selfish, greedy person that won't let people do things for me sometimes, or I get angry about things that don't go my way. And that's silly, because I have a Christ that died for me and to remove my sins, and I need to let him have all of that. And so my life continued. It continued to grow. Obviously, I was still a dumb teenager. I still did dumb teenager things as I continued to grow. And I continued the rest of my high school life. And I wouldn't say it was until I went to college that I really learned what being a child of God meant, what being a true disciple meant, when I was fully surrounded by brothers and sisters doing church ministry while living with brothers that were all fighting for the same goal, and that was becoming more like Christ and sharing that love and news with the rest of the world. And I would love to share those stories more sometime. Please reach out, please ask me, because it's just a continuation of the story. And as I say so many times in this podcast throughout the years, is the story doesn't end. Like, that was the beginning. That's not even really the beginning. There's so much of my childhood that could be fleshed out even more. But we don't have all day. I know I don't. I know you don't. I want to respect all of our time by circling back to the thing I said towards the start of this episode again, of we all have a story to tell. I've said that so many times. I really want to encourage you to share it, because I've had such wonderful opportunities to share my story with others and have them impacted. I've heard so many other people's stories, and it's grown me as a believer. I've heard so many stories about people sharing their salvation testimony and it changing lives and it bringing renew to whole families. Share your story. If you're scared to share your story, I get it. This was terrifying for me. If you go back and listen to the first episode, actually, I have it with me right here. Here's the script. I wrote a script for the first time I shared it, which now I look back and say it's silly that I did that, but I was so scared to sit here and record my story the first time that I wrote a word for word script. And if you listen to it, you can hear that I'm reading off of a piece of paper, and I was terrified while doing it. Now I can easily share. I've shared my salvation testimony so many times, and I want the same for you. I want you to have the freedom. I want you to have the joy to be able to just share it, because we need to share our story, because it's the most powerful tool that you have to evangelize. We love the Bible, obviously, but so many people around the world don't love the Bible, but they do love you. You have friends, you have family that love you but don't love God. Share your life with them. Share how you got to here now, so that they understand why it's important. Once they understand that, then they will understand why the Bible is important to you. Share your life with them. Live life with them. Share a meal with them. Ask someone to go out to dinner in hopes to find out what they believe, so you can share what you believe. But even more so, not in like a I gotcha kind of way, but as a heartfelt thing of like, hey, this is how my life changed, and this is why I'm the person I am now, and I really want you to know it. So sharpen that sword. It is such an important tool you have to make such an impact in this world. And if you're scared and you don't know how to do that, reach out to me. That's been a goal of this podcast for years, is to help people that don't know how to share their story to share it, because I see the value of your story. I know the value of my story, and God sees those values too. That's why he gives us these stories, is so that we can share them. Just like he gives us everything that he gives us, is so that we can share it with others. So thank you so much for joining me on this adventure. I'm so excited to continue doing the podcast, sharing the podcast, hearing your stories, sharing your stories with other people. It has brought me nothing but joy that I've been craving from God. And audience, as always, thank you for listening. I couldn't do this without you. Goodbye.